Welcome to the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the Kundalini Yoga 3HO community. I'm your host, Guru Nishan, and I was born and raised in this community, so the people of our community matter to me. And I want to thank all of you listeners for tuning into the stories that have come forth. If you'd like to donate to our podcast, you're welcome to at gurunishan.com/uncomfortableconversations. And please share these episodes with someone you love, someone from our community that hasn't yet tuned into the conversations that are taking place. At the beginning of every podcast, I like to share the intentions for why I started this podcast. Number one, to break the veil of silence that has long permeated and continues to strangle the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community in the name of neutrality. Number two, to validate and help clarify the complex feelings of those who have joined this lifestyle, were born and raised into it, and or who have practiced or taught Kundalini Yoga. Number three, to encourage active listening to uncomfortable conversations from our community as a revolutionary act of self and collective healing. Number four, to let survivors know that we see them, we believe them, we love them, and we will fight for their truth to be addressed. Number five, to let teachers who are denying, gaslighting, or spiritually bypassing know that what they are doing is willfully ignorant and re-traumatizing victims. Number six, to illuminate the inherent racism, homophobia, cultural misappropriation, and exploitation that perpetuates the teachings, 3HO lifestyle, and overall community ethos. Number seven, to stop the perpetuation of gaslighting and victim shaming by naming it for what it is. Number eight, to dismantle internalized shame, guilt, toxic positivity, and light-washing mentality. Number nine, to honor all of the parts of ourselves that have been forgotten or silenced. Number 10, to honor each and every body that has come through our community, both named and unnamed. Number 11, to encourage people to do their own research, process their own emotions, get somatic therapy and other support therapy as needed, draw your own conclusions, and be critical thinkers rather than just blindly follow anyone. Your story matters. Please share it when you're ready. We're here to listen and to support you. This is episode 21, and I want to welcome today's guest. His name is Dharm Khalsa. He was born and raised in the Anchorage, Alaska ashram to his parents, Guru Bandhu Singh and Atma Khalsa, both 3HO Kundalini Yoga practitioners. Shortly after he was born, the Anchorage, Alaska ashram closed down, and that was run by the Nirvairs at the time. At the age of 13, he left Alaska to attend Miri Piri Academy in Amritsar, India. He spent 5 years at MPA before returning to the U.S. for college and professional life. He is currently a freelance photographer, videographer, and photographer specializing in environmental conservation and government. I want to welcome you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being on today, Dharm. I know I had heard your story on one of the listening calls. That was kind of an insular thing happening in 2020. And so thank you for making yourself available to speak on our podcast today. Why do you feel it's important that you share your story in this platform?
Yeah, I mean, I've been inspired by all the sharings that have happened on this podcast so far. And I think for those of us that are interested in sharing it, I mean, for me, it's kind of a cathartic experience to talk about the experience and just for people to know about it. because, you know, there's a lot of layers of being a person, and we all go through hard times, but, you know, it's important to share those hard times because not everyone should have to go through those. So hopefully in sharing this, we're putting it out in the world and encouraging people to think about the choices that they make too. And when they see things happening, you know, to say something about it.
Choices to stay silent or to speak up or to redirect the pattern, so to speak, the silent pattern. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think it's really important to change the silent culture of just like, I'll just deal with it within myself. I don't want to burden anybody else, so to speak. And yet we free each other as we free ourselves from these confines of shame and isolation.
So, yeah, for sure.
Thank you. So, I don't even know where you want to begin, but tell us a little bit about being born into the Dharma and what that was like, and then your transition into India, or wherever you'd like to start, actually. Do you want to start with when the revelations came out in 2020, or do you want to bring us back?
I'll just start from the very beginning.
Sounds good.
So yeah, I just wanted to make one small correction. I was actually born after the Anchorage Ashram closed down in a trailer in Anchorage. So like my mom was pregnant with me in the Anchorage Ashram, and then right before, like about a month or two before I was born, then the ashram closed down. They were the last ones to leave, actually. And the Nirvair said, sorry, like, you know, we have to close this operation now, and you need to find another place to stay. So yeah, to start at the beginning, you know, my parents were living in Anchorage in the ashram. And like I said, when my mom was about, you know, 7 or 8 months pregnant with me, the ashram closed down. And so they were able to talk with some friends of theirs who had a trailer in Anchorage, and it was in a trailer park. And then I was born. My mom loves to talk about how I was born in an underwater bath. Like, she put me in the bath and gave birth. And wow. So she always talks about how I'm a water baby, and that's one of her favorite things to talk about. But yeah, like, you know, overall, so like as a kid growing up in Alaska, like I said, I was born in Anchorage, but up until I was about a year old, my parents were living in that trailer, and then they were searching for a more permanent place to live, and so they moved out to Wasilla, which is like an hour drive north. It's just around the bay from Anchorage, so you have to drive around the whole bay to get there. And so they found a really nice, like, cedar A-frame house. It was out in the woods, and, you know, really beautiful location. And that's where I grew up until I was 13. So yeah, growing up in Alaska, you know, I really did not interface that much with 3HO people in Alaska, because it's Alaska. There was no one within, you know, at least like a dozen miles of where I lived, really. So it was very insular, but, you know, but I did go to, you know, my parents always made it to summer solstice. And so every summer I remember getting on the plane and going to New Mexico, and like, my favorite thing to do at solstice was to look for lizards and try and catch them. And I did that a lot until one year I got bitten by a lizard. And then I was like, that's it. I'm not going to do this anymore.
No longer interesting.
Yeah. So that was kind of that.
So every year growing up, you would go to summer solstice. This is something you look forward to. This is how you created bonds and friendships outside of your insular environment in Alaska.
Well, yeah. So when I went to solstice, I was always kind of more interested in nature than like other people. so like I would hang out with the kids that, you know, were into like exploring and looking for lizards and snakes and stuff like that. But I didn't ever like going to the lectures or the yoga classes or anything. Like, I always just wanted to be out in nature, and I'm still like that today. But yeah, like in Alaska, I did have some friends in Alaska. There was a couple of friends in my neighborhood. And so like I always grew up with, like, outside of the 3HO bubble, I think, like that. Like, I didn't grow up like a lot of other second generation kids in, like, you know, big communities with lots of other ashram kids. Like, I grew up with, I had friends that, like, my best friend as a kid was Mormon, and like he lived down the street from me. And like one time I went to the Mormon tabernacle with them, and saw that whole thing. But so I always grew up with, like, just different people, and whoever was in the area. So yeah, my first experience really getting to know other people from the 3HO community besides Solstice was MPA.
Okay. So then how did that come about?
Yeah. So, okay. So like I said, I was, we would always go to the summer solstice event, and I was always really inspired by the MPA nights, the Gatka performances, and the Bangada and all that. Like, they would have the whole night with those demonstrations. And so I was actually the one, more than my parents, I think. I was the one that said I wanted to travel there, because I was always really interested in traveling, and I was always looking through National Geographic magazines and thinking about like where I could go in the world. And so like I remember going by the MPA booth at the bazaar, and yeah, basically like just stopping by and thinking like, how cool would it be to go to India? Because my mom would always read me these stories as a kid, the stories of the Sikh gurus, and it kind of paints India in this like fantastic light. Like, there's all these little villages everywhere, and people are, I don't know, it's just a whole different like kind of there's an exotic nature to it, when you hear those stories as a kid. And so anyways, I bugged my parents about going, and then eventually, like, we were always like pretty poor growing up. And so like, eventually some family friends said they would help contribute one year. And so I think it was 2004 or 2005. I don't remember which one was my first year, but like I went to India when I was 13. And I remember getting on the plane in Anchorage with Nirvair's son, Harai, from Alaska. And that was his last year there. So that was my first year. And yeah, we made the journey across, and then India was a whole different thing than I expected it to be.
Yeah, I want you to pause here because I want to get some real context for this. You grow up in Alaska, you're going to Solstice at 13. You're the one saying, hey, I want to go to India, and I really just want to kind of like marinate in that for all of us for a second, because it's really important to understand the several decades prior of this is what the cool kids do, for lack of a better cultural context. So of course, more kids growing up are going to be like, yes, I want. And I'm not saying that that's bad or good. I'm just saying, as a community, I think there's a theme that's kind of playing out in that, well, my kids weren't sent there, or I wasn't sent there. Well, of course not, because by this time, as a culture, we've already infused if you're in the inner cool group and you're following the path and all the things, this is what we do. We send our children to India. And as kids, whether you're 5, 8, 10, 13, right? We want in on that. And I remember it from my generation, you're a couple generations later. When I say generations, just ages, right? So I'm just pointing that out, because what I'm hearing with MPA and the MPA nights, I've heard this in a couple of stories, and I haven't been around long enough for when MPA was around. I mean, I know it still is, but I just mean when it transitioned to MPA. The fact that there's even MPA nights, right? It's kind of sensationalizing it, and a bit of a marketing tool for it. It's like, hey, let's show what the possibility of your child can be in the future. And I think there's value in that. And then there's also not, simultaneously, right? We can paint a picture, just like there's predatory marketing and good marketing. All of that is kind of infused in what I'm hearing with this, in that our young kids grow up and see these painted pictures of the possibility of life in India, and then comes, okay, what's it really like?
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, like I remember my mom being really into the idea as long as I've been around, because she she really wanted to send me to India, because she wanted to do everything right, like and I remember hearing this on the Ranjan story too, on this podcast, that my mom was like that. You know, she wanted to do everything right. She wanted to raise me as like this saintly man, you know, and like, so she was doing everything within her power to do things to the T, just like Yogi Bhajan said. And
Yep.
so, you know, that meant doing banis every day and doing meditations for 2.5 hours. I mean, I remember doing, you know, 2.5 hours South Korea for like, you know, months.
Yeah.
and you know, and then of course the India. Yeah. So like it was definitely something that she wanted for me. And I remember it being really hard for her, like the first couple of years that I was there, like, you know, just sending me off. And also like, you know, I remember, you know, definitely being homesick my first year, and the first couple of years definitely being pretty homesick.
Yeah, quite a cultural shock. Um, yeah. So anyway, so keep going. You get on the plane. You're with an older brother of the Dharma who had been there for a while, but you're much younger than him.
Yeah. So, yeah. So like, you know, that plane flight, I remember really well because I was really excited about it. And I remember meeting up with everyone, and I don't remember which direction we went that year. We would usually stop in either, at least when I was going to MPA, we would usually stop in either Singapore or we'd stop in like Frankfurt and go through the Europe way. And anyways, I remember getting to Delhi, and it was really like just crowded. Indira Gandhi International Airport, you know, there was like water dripping from the ceiling and like on the customs papers, and you know, everyone's shouting, and then you walk outside and it's just really hot and sticky, and then we all, you know, loaded up on this big bus and took a 10-hour bus ride to Amritsar, and then we, you know, got settled in the building. And you know, I honestly don't remember a lot from that first year of like really specific details about logistics and how things work, because yeah, like that was the year that I got like really bullied. Like it was like one of the worst years of my life. Yeah, like I don't know, I guess I could just jump into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically, like, I was coming from Alaska. I was a really shy kid. I think by nature I'm just more like a reserved person, than, you know, by nature anyways. But you know, coming to a culture of, you know, kids that mostly know each other, that are from different communities that are big in lower 48 in Mexico, whatever, Germany. I was kind of an outcast. So like, I didn't know anyone there, like, and to top that off, I was kind of shy and I didn't know how to deal with people. So, so I got made fun of when, you know, I would get really reactional. Like I would get really angry, like when people would, you know, call me names. And so then they wanted to make fun of me more and more. And so, yeah, so they made up a nickname for me, and they called me like Dave Dumbass. And then they made up a song about me. And they would sing it on the bus after we went to the Golden Temple for 40-day seva. It was, for me, it was 40 days of being called names when I got on the bus every time. So yeah, I would just like, I remember just being like, kind of dreading it, like, oh boy, here we go. Got to get on the bus now and hear my name, you know, and hear the song about me. And so, yeah, it kind of made me feel like shit. And
After service and seva at the Golden Temple, then for 40 days you became a part of this ritual of the ritual song of making fun of you. And
yeah,
this song.
basically. Yeah, and I mean, I want to give credit though. I do want to give credit that like everyone that called me names has issued me apologies personally by direct message, and you know, it's been really meaningful to me to, you know, that people cared enough to say something about it, because, you know, that's, yeah, that made a big difference for me. So, you know, I think it's really important for anyone that, you know, that did name calling or you know, anything like that, to say something, you know, even if you don't think it's going to make a difference, because I think it does for people.
Mm-hmm. It absolutely breaks up the scar tissue. Um, and are you saying they reached out and apologized since the revelations have come out, like this past year in 2020, or even before then, before all this broke open?
Yeah, like a few. One person issued me an apology years ago, a couple of years ago, and like, you know, I think something really significant happened in his life that made him think about it, and so I think he felt the urge to do that because of that life change. And then, yeah, more recently, since the revelations have come out, like everyone else has made that apology. So, and one of them happened because of those calls too, the calls that,
The listening calls.
yeah, the listening calls.
Mm-hmm.
So those are also helpful,
Yeah.
I think, for people.
And I want to just point out that this is just a really important element you're sharing, in that when we have when there's a long-term culture of abuse, one can be a victim and then also become a predator. And it's a very hard thing to unpack this scar tissue, or to start even wanting to examine it, when we know we both were a predator and we got preyed on earlier. So if I start to admit this, I have to go here. And it's just such a beautiful point, in that the fact that there are people that have reached out is meaning they're letting themselves crack open to feel their part. And then below that are more layers that they're opening themselves up to. So I just want to say, all of you listening that have been preyed on and became predators and don't even know whether speaking out against some of the people you've hurt would even make a difference, it does. It makes a huge difference, both in our own energetics as well as for the person. And it opens up scar tissue and opens up a wound that got tissued over versus actually disinfected properly.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. So yeah, so that was kind of my first year in a nutshell. Was just, basically like, I just remember a lot of like feelings of, like I would always get picked on, and then I would go and find a corner and just hide from everyone, because I didn't really want to be there. But also on the other front, like, so like my catch-22 with India was always that, India was not like the most fun place to be at times, but also back home, like, my parents were always arguing. And so like they had their own problems, with their marriage and all that. And so, I didn't want to be there full time either, because, I wanted to be with friends and, with people that I felt really close to. And so, from the friendships that I developed at MPA through the years, like I was like, well, I mean, I'd rather be in India dealing with that stuff than I would be in Alaska dealing with this stuff. So that was, I don't know how many other people had those kind of situations, but for me, that was a big decision maker for keeping going to India, was that, I didn't feel like, like my home was really the place I wanted to be, because I just felt kind of stagnant, and like, and I wanted to move forward with life and, and do what I wanted to do. And so, being independent on my own made me feel that way. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And more adventurous, kind of out in the world, right?
Yeah.
So this first year, it sounds like it was quite traumatic. It was a lot of verbal abuse and kind of public, kind of group shaming. Was there also physical abuse?
Yeah. I mean, like there was a culture at that time of like the seniors, the older students would come and like they would give us beatings in the classroom. Like it wasn't like incredibly like painful physical abuse, but it was something that I don't think any of us really like to have happen. And I remember there was also things that happened at that time that where the seniors would come, the older kids would come into the younger kids' dorm rooms, and they would just bother us at night, like shooting us with pellet guns, or putting like easy cheese on our face, and it was just like harassment like that. It was things, you never felt like you had a safe place, because your room could get invaded at any time, and the older kids would basically like kind of enslave you for tasks. And so there is kind of like a pecking order that the school operated on, that I think it went all the way up to Jagat Guru and the staff at that time, who saw it happen and they didn't take action, because and I think Jagat Guru specifically was a perpetrator of that, because he would, he thought it was funny. Like he often thought it was funny, and or at least he had a smile on his face and he wouldn't say anything about it. So when an authority figure in an academy like that condones that kind of behavior, then of course it's going to continue, and it's going to, it's just going to marinate and not get better. It's going to become worse, because then it becomes institutionalized. So that's what I
He's
saw
the
happen there.
principal, is that correct? He's the principal of the school?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think
Or
at that time he was the spiritual life director, I want to say. I don't know exactly what his title was at that time.
okay.
Yeah, but it was Amrit Singh as the director of student life and Jagat Guru as the director of spiritual life. And they kind of worked together to run the school, I think.
Okay, and from the top down, this hierarchy of relations with the ages, like the kind of helped everybody stay in order, so to speak, is what you think it was? It's just like a culture of.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. I don't want to speak for them, and I know that some of those people have since changed their view of things. But
Let me also say that they were students of the system themselves, so they're also
yeah,
products.
right.
Just for clarification, they went to school before the school was owned by, quote, our organization. And these are students that kind of moved into these, quote, leadership roles without necessarily the education experience behind them as academics.
Yeah, and that's what came across for me, like, especially, yeah, just thinking about the staff at that time, is that I know that some of them has said that they just felt like they were doing what they were directed to do by Yogi Bhajan, and they were doing the best that they could at that. And some of them, like you said, were directly students at those other schools in India, and they were just doing what the culture was when they were there. So yeah, I mean, it really goes back pretty far. Like, it's not something that just cropped up when I was there. It was obviously an established culture, and there was established traditions for things that were considered appropriate to do. So
what did you feel like were your options? So you don't have safe space, you have older students coming in, kind of making you be their slave, so to speak, like do whatever they want. Did you have one person that did that, or were there several? And did this go on for many years? Kind of give us a sense of the time period and the experience.
yeah, I mean, the first year was the worst by far. Like, that was the worst. And there was a group of older students that would specifically like pick on me. And I think later on, like, a lot of them graduated. That first year, a lot of them graduated. And so then, the later years, there was still people that picked on me, but it wasn't like before. But also, I think I remember a big turning point for me was when I remember this one kid had me do, he was forcing me to do push-ups and like, do basically just do like certain exercise moves and stuff. And I just, I got tired of it. So I kicked him in the shin really hard. And then I remember after that, he was like, "Ow, that was really painful." And he never messed with me again. And so I think I started to learn also, I mean, that was the positive benefit too, is like, those are challenges I would have faced in some way in the world, I'm sure. And, I did learn how to deal with people and like push back a little bit. So, once I learned how to stand up for myself more, like, and not just to get really, reactionary and kind of pissed off, like, I think things went better, because I just knew how to stand up for myself more. But
Now, I didn't go to any of the schools in India, so I'm just trying to get a sense of kind of the feeling, the sense of what the atmosphere was like. I hear the kind of like teasing and kind of putting cheese in your face and like this kind of stuff. The physical brutality, was it debilitating for you? Like, were you actually like, I mean, you were a little older. I know some people went at 8, but you're like 13, but you're saying, it sounds like you're quite a small young man at that time.
yeah, well, so yeah, just to kind of paint a picture, like, are you asking about the physical abuse itself, or are you asking about how
Yeah,
the school actually operated at that time?
a little bit of both, but I want you to stay in your personal experience because it's easy to look back and kind of like overarching, kind of, I think this is what was going on, but more from your own personal experience of like, resilience comes out of having to adapt to a situation. So I hear you say, well, anywhere I could have gone through these experiences. And while that's true, it's kind of a part of our upbringing as a young person to kind of adult. It's not reactionary to react to abuse. It's abuse. And yet our culture, personally, 3HO culture, has taught us that's reactionary.
Yeah.
And even that language kind of contracted me a little bit, because I appreciate what you're saying, and it is true. Anywhere we go, we might be faced with bullying, we might be faced with situations, but it doesn't make the culture of our own internal silence and abuse right or okay because you were able to start standing up for yourself. I want to commend that, but I also want to get more of a feeling of like, what are your options, right? What is your only option then to start learning how to stand up for yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So basically, yeah. I mean, I guess I felt like, can you just clarify the question again?
Yeah, just more like, what I know that there's, the bullying, like putting cheese on the face and kind of
Yeah.
coming into the classroom and punching you in the arm, stuff like that, which is kind of like older boy bullying. But then there's another levels of bullying, and then there's levels where where your physical system felt unsafe to be around, and like, I don't know, just more situations where we can get a feeling of
Right.
what the abuse like that.
Yeah. Well, so like what one thing I remember is like we would go on. Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, so we would have these evening meditations, and I remember after the evening meditations, like it would just be like these hallway bullying moments. Like you'd be on your way out of the door, and like they'd be like, "Oh, hey, Dave, dumbass," and like like punch you. They'd punch me in the spine.
Punch you in the spine.
Yeah, like knuckle punch me in the spine, and yeah, I mean that definitely hurt. And and then they'd be like, "Oh, you're gonna like tough it out," like. And then another thing I remember is, so there's those hallway moments like that where you would just be on your way somewhere, and they would kind of like, hijack you. And then there was also
What does it mean to hijack you?
Well, you're going to your dorm room, or you're on your way somewhere, and then you just get hijacked and like, kind of just abused. So
does that mean a group of people are punching you, slapping you, or just yelling?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, like for me, it was, I remember the punching. I remember the punching on the spine, and, yeah, and also the slapping, because like I remember we'd go on these trips, for the winter break. We'd go to like, I don't remember if it was winter or spring break. I think we went to, Rishikesh every spring, and then we would go on these other trips, so like places like Manali and Dharamsala during winter break. And so I remember one trip specifically that we were on the bus and I think we were coming back from, I want to say like Manali or something like that. I don't remember exactly which place, but it was somewhere really far away that we took a bus. And so we were on our way back, and it was like a 8-hour bus ride. And I remember sitting with a friend of mine. I think it was a friend of mine. I don't know if I want to say names because I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but
totally up to you.
Yeah, but anyways, like I remember that on the way back, they're like, "Oh, like let's see who cries first," and they would like slap us like the whole way back. We'd be slapped until we cried, and like that was really sad, because I remember the guy that I was sitting next to, like he didn't, he definitely didn't really, like, yeah, he just wasn't someone that cried a lot. So I remember being like, wow, like, he was actually crying, and it was really kind of sad to see, because he's not someone that cries easily. So yeah, it would just be like all the way back. And it was just a fun game. It was like, for them, it was a fun game where, you're getting like sadistic pleasure out of seeing someone else's pain, basically. So that was the culture, that, and it was just, and it was, it was just something that people passed down, that, I think a lot of them, probably they thought it was funny, but they also thought it was like kind of the way that you groom people to like be strong in the world, or I don't know, like it was the way that you, it was also, I think for some people, like, just a way of like dealing with things in their own lives there, because, they were getting bullied, so they would bully other people. And also like, I remember even myself, like I would, I was a squad leader my last year, I don't remember, my last year, I think, or no, my second to last year there. And I remember being, picking on some younger kids. I wouldn't, like do that much, but still, I would kind of pass on that torch of bullying a bit, because it was kind of like the cool thing to do, like, and I wanted to fit in. So yeah, just it's the perpetual cycle that um, that kept on going.
Mm-hmm. So as you got older, you kind of grew into that too, because it was just how you survived the system.
Well, our class always liked to, we always like to say to each other that like we were the class that stopped bullying. And
Mm.
I mean, I don't know, I don't think that's necessarily true, but I did, I mean, it's hard for me to say. I think you'd have to ask younger kids, but from my perception, I think that there was actually a lot less bullying when we were older than my first year. But maybe that's also my perception because of how much I was bullied my first year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say, but I don't remember anyone doing like that kind of name calling, like on the bus when someone got in. I don't remember anyone doing that like in my later years. So I do think that, it was somewhat calmer, uh, in my last couple of years there. But again, I can't speak for anyone else. I mean,
Sure.
people obviously still had difficult times there.
What year did you go over?
I think it was 2005,
Okay, and then what year did you graduate?
2010.
2010. Okay.
Yeah.
So this first year really bad. Obviously, theme songs are being made about you. Then it is also physical brutality that's pretty regular. Obviously, emotional, spiritual abuse. What I heard you say is after evening meditation. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of this pattern of meditation infused with the culture of bullying, and kind of meditations and yoga being used as like punishments to that you have to do to show your excellence or something.
Yeah, well, I do remember like we would do the standing at attention. Like that was our punishment for doing bad things. Like if people would jump the wall and go to town, they'd have to stand at attention for so long. And that's a whole nother conversation, because there's, I remember standing at attention because the principal, there was a lady from the US that year. This was like the academic principal. And she uh, she couldn't find her laptop, and so it was like a really hot day. It was like over 100 degrees, and we had to stand at attention the whole school day almost, like in sweltering heat, like because she couldn't find her laptop. And then she found her laptop, and it turns out the lady who was cleaning that day moved her laptop, and she thought that someone stole it. And it's like we had to all stand at attention the whole day because the principal, thought that someone stole your laptop when in fact they didn't. And it's like that kind of punishment is just not, it's obviously someone that doesn't know much about schooling, um, you know, because that's not something that an entire school should have to endure.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that you deal with someone one-on-one, or you investigate more. And I remember a lot of things like that happening, like where, people would, yeah, they would think that students were doing things, and then they would kind of put the blame on everyone. So there was kind of that kind of, you know um, that kind of behavior where, it's like someone messed up, so we're all going to have to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was both from staff and other students, I think, because I remember when we were all in the squads there, and we would do the marching drills, and someone would screw up, so we'd all have to do push-ups. It's like the military way of doing things. I think that kind of culture exists in the military too.
It sounds like when MPA got formed, it went more that military route. There was that gap of from Guru Ram Das, right, from GNFC, then it went Guru Ram Das Academy, and Nimi was in there, right, the military academy, and then when MPA started, it kind of seems like it adopted a real military hierarchical model, which makes sense for where YB comes from, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there was, I do remember some people coming to the school that were from that military culture. Like I remember the guy who founded A Call Security came there, and he would do like marching drills with us, and he'd be kind of tough like that. And there was another guy too. I don't remember his name, but I remember this one guy who was actually in the Marines, I want to say, or the Army. You know, he came one time and he made us do army crawls across the soccer field at like 6 a.m. And you know, that was like, I think that was the remnants of that like earlier culture that was very military focused. And I think when I was there, like that was kind of like phasing out a bit because, you know, Jagat Guru was getting older, and a lot of those people that were really hardcore military had already left, I think. But yeah, there was still some of that there for sure.
Now, when you went to India in 2005-ish, did you not come home for 5 years, or did you return at the end of each year?
Yeah, so I returned every year. And I know that, yeah, some people that went there earlier, they actually stayed over the summers, I think. But that, yeah, um, our class, you know, from the time that I went there onwards, like we always came home. But no one went home during the winter for winter break. But
The summer,
yeah,
everyone did.
yeah.
So, um, the stories where everyone stayed, that was earlier, and was that more financial, that people couldn't afford to come back and forth, or so no longer did families stay? Like, did that change over time, is what you're saying, that later on in MPA all the students left, all the students went back, versus some staying because they couldn't afford to come back?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard that. I've definitely heard some people that I knew there saying that, you know, their parents couldn't afford to send them back during the summer before. But yeah, like by the time that I went, we always went home during the summers.
Okay, that was just a part of how the program worked. And then you
Yeah.
had mentioned earlier that your parents didn't necessarily have the finances to send you to school in India, which I can relate to. A lot of other, kids never went to school in India because their parents didn't have the resources. You had mentioned some neighbor friends that had offered to help scholarship you, and did that just continue, or did your parents just find other ways to keep sending you each year?
Yeah, no, that continued. I think that, you know, possibly one or two of those years they did pay out of their pocket, which was a big deal because my dad ran a house cleaning business in Anchorage. Like he didn't, you know, have a retirement or make a lot of money from that, but
Mm-hmm.
they did really believe that it was the right thing to do. So they did everything possible to like make that happen. But yeah, like it definitely was mostly the biggest reason I went was because, you know, like we had family friends that would pay for the at least part of the schooling and then also the plane ticket sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm contexting this because this is a special thing. I mean, it's quite a privilege to be able to know that another family is helping to sponsor this possibility to happen for me. And
Yeah.
in the context of that, it's really hard to be like, well, should I just discard this and say I don't like it, right? We're trying to reconcile in our own soul a bit. At least what I'm hearing you say, like, God, this is bad, but back home it's bad, and I should feel lucky that this is happening, and just kind of all the ways that we try to figure out how to deal with our circumstances when it's a painful place.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us more about what your years, or kind of what else you want us to know about your time there, about your development. That first year, quite bad, and then as you develop your time there, what else do you want us to hear?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much I could say about, you know, being in India and just, like I said, for me, it's a catch 22 because, you know, I do have good memories from India, but also there's, you know, there's the aspects of India that were just not healthy, you know, and that it was, yeah, it was in a way kind of like a system that was not good. But, you know, I also feel that, you know, the thing is also that if I went to school, like sometimes I think about like, well, what if I went to school in like Alaska, you know, and, you know, public school in Alaska was also not a very good place to be. So that's why I also feel like, you know, it's a catch-22, because it's like, yeah, if I went to school in Alaska, there, you know, I would not have had the cultural appreciation that I do having gone to school in India. And that for me is a really big deal. And it's helped me a lot in my life. So, you know, I felt like that part of the experience was really good, you know, because it encouraged me to travel more, you know, during college and keep doing things that, you know, like learning about other cultures and other ways of doing things. But also, you know, I wouldn't wish the bullying or the, you know, basically domestic violence, you know, on anyone. Like it's not a system that is good. So yeah, I mean, I struggle with it, you know, because I think that, you know, kids should have experiences abroad, you know, and I think that it's a healthy thing, because like as a culture in the United States, we're not the most like worldly culture. We think that we're the best, and we think that we're the ones that are right, and we like to dominate the world. And, you know, being an American, I see that in my, you know, I see that in my dad. Like, you know, he's been an American citizen his whole life, and he's been out of the country like once or twice, you know, and like it's just I see this like attitude of like we're the best, you know, America's the best, and like, you know, I really like to be a world citizen. I like to be, you know, out in the world learning and like appreciating other cultures and learning about, you know, the world. So yeah, I mean, I think you know, the school in India, you know, it's really unfortunate that it turned out that way, because I think it could have been a much better thing, you know, if it were run correctly. But now it is what it is, and that's, you know, that's the situation we're in.
Well, I think now it's being exposed to the full totality of it,
Yeah.
the full range of experiences versus just the picture that's painted. Which, you know, I want to say, when I was at the European Yoga Festival and I saw the MPA presentations, I was thoroughly impressed. Beyond, like, wow, you know. So I think what you're bringing up is a very important point, that speaking to the trauma, the domestic violence, the brutality of something doesn't take away the richness or the good qualities that experience might have offered us too. And I think
Yeah.
one of the hardest things that we have to deal with as a community, as well as individuals, that speaking to the pain and the trauma and the abuse of my experience doesn't take away the fact that there were also really excellent, amazing parts of it simultaneously.
Yeah, and I kind of relate to like also to Narinjan's story in that way too, just as far as being part of like the 3HO community growing up, because like in some ways I feel like you know, being part of that community, you know, well, I don't know how much of it was part of the community and how much of it was because of having parents that cared about me, but you know, I felt like they really tried to instill, you know, values in me that were good, and they wanted me to be, you know, an honest person and, you know, do good things in the world, and because of that, you know, I went off in the world and you know, I try and do good things in general, but you know, yeah, I mean, like there's definitely a balance, because on the other side of things, we see like Rama and, you know, that whole movement, which is really toxic, and, you know, just the gaslighting, right? Like you know, I see that yoga teacher mentality of like, you know, this is the right way. It's just like when you go to like a,
Superiority.
Yeah, right. It's just like when you go to like an evangelical ceremony, like an evangelical church, like, because I did go to one of those, and it's like, I remember the pastor being like, Jesus is, the best. Krishna and Buddha and all these guys are nothing. And it's the same mentality, right? Like it's like, this is the way, but like really what we should be doing is just facilitating good space for people, and just um, being open. Like the Golden Temple, it has 4 doors, right? Like we're supposed to be welcoming to everyone, and appreciating what everyone brings to the table, not just saying what we think is right. And I saw a lot of that happening, at Solstice throughout the years, and at MPA, and you know, like personally, I feel like, I'm like, I relate a lot with Sikhism in some ways, but I also think it's important to forge your own path in life, and just like, learn about things authentically. So I guess I'm kind of branching off here from India, but I just wanted to say, like, you know, like, yeah, I mean, one of the things that I saw, um, throughout growing up and going to Solstice and all this stuff, was that there's also a huge lack of critical thinking in the 3HO community. And that's one of the biggest downfalls of the community, I think, is that, people really they're attracted to the community because they want to be good people and they want to do good things. But without having that ability to critically analyze and just like dialogue and think about things, and just like take them apart and look and see like what's going on, you can get trapped in the dogma. Like you get trapped in the kind of, the shaming and the cultural slash, religious, spiritual superiority of those organizations like Rama and like these other ones that, they just they don't respect other ways of doing things. And so I don't know. I think that's the balance to be had, is people need to learn those skills and apply them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying that, like that's why I went to college and I took philosophy. And, at the time I thought it was like really cool, because it's not something I think it's because it's something I didn't really, grew up with seeing in the 3HO community. It was like, I didn't see the freedom of like, like looking at a way of doing things and being like, okay, does this actually make sense? Or like, is this benefiting everyone truly? And, doing that kind of study, like helped me figure that out a little bit,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think you make a really great point too around, on one end it's like real open, it's inclusive, we accept and love everyone, and yet then there's actually an air of spiritual superiority. But if you cut your hair, or you don't wear a turban, or it doesn't look like this, or da 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 da, as a culture, it was kind of like, oh, you're shunned and you're doing that wrong. And what an interesting thing. Like, oh, we're all inclusive. This practice and teachings are for everyone. It's going to change humanity. And yet if you don't do it like this, you're not among the elite spiritual warriors. And that's not the essence of why so many people think they're getting involved in the community.
Yeah, exactly. It's like there's this pyramid where like you have to like, crawl to the top and like claim victory. But that shouldn't be the goal. It should just be about, being, being a community, and supporting each other on, whatever your journey is, right? Like, but yeah, I mean, it's important to have those, those skills, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when you left India, I'm guessing you were still practicing full on in Sikh Dharma, and you leave India and you come back. Do you want to give us a sense of like anything left in India and then that transition back here? Or...
Sure. Yeah. So like my journey since MPA has been interesting, because, I actually, okay. So when I left India, I applied my last year there. I was applying for like colleges, and, I really did not want to go back to Alaska and like live with my parents. So I was doing everything possible to make sure that didn't happen. So, so I took my SATs, I remember the first time I took them, you know, in India, I think I had like a fever and I still went and tried to do it. And like, I got a really bad score. So I had to redo it. Um, and then anyways, the next time I did fine. So but the college search on its own was a trip in India. I mean, like, you know, I remember there was a lady there that was supposed to be like my college advisor, and she left like halfway through the year. So like, I didn't have a college advisor. I had to do it all on my own. And I looked through the, you know, the College Board website, and I applied to like a bunch of different colleges. And I knew I wanted to go to like a small college that was like liberal arts. So anyways, I ended up going to a college in Ohio, and it was called the College of Worcester. And it was a super cool college. I had a great time there. Yeah, like, so I actually went to college like in Ohio right after I graduated. So I had the summer in Alaska, you know, the fall time. My dad and my uncle drove from Indiana to Ohio to drop me off there. And then they're like, okay, see you later. And that was the last time my dad showed up at college for like 4 years.
Wow.
And so, you know, like I was still in that kind of like boarding school atmosphere with like everyone living together at the college, and a lot of international students. But yeah, to make a long story short, you know, I felt like, you know, I was like coming into the college, I was like this kind of like lost child from India with like a, you know, white kid with a turban on. So anyways, of course, I connected right away with the international kids. And I ended up with all these like Indian friends and Nepali friends. And so anyways, they just thought it was like a trip that I was like wearing a turban and, you know, white. so anyways, like, I mean, that's why I say it's like hip swing too, because like I made all these great friends from college also because I was wearing a turban and I had those experiences. So
I just
so
think
anyways,
it's a really important point you're bringing up, because a part of what has kept me keeping our community in this light of goodness was the privilege of the international perspective on the world. And I call it
exactly.
a privilege because I feel like it's very much what has anchored me of finding the good of my life experience was the international perspective that I know a lot of my American friends just don't have. They don't have a perspective on the world. I'm so in value of that in my experience. And in my life over the years, I've been able to like look more and more at the trauma without getting hijacked with that benefit. But sorry to
Yeah. No, I totally relate. And yeah, like that, you know, I remember my first year in college was like, you know, my friends were all getting wasted. And I was just like, I was this kid from India, and I was just like, I was always like a good kid, you know? So like, I was like, oh, all my friends are getting wasted, so I guess I have to take care of them. So I would just like, you know, my friend would come like blacked out to me in the middle of the night at college, and, you know, whatever, I'd have to deal with them. But you know, and you know, I started like going to some parties and, you know, drinking some beer and stuff, and you know, I just realized that life wasn't for me either. so, yeah, like I came into college feeling like I wanted to like definitely forge my own path, and I felt like, you know, I was wearing a turban, but I also felt like conflicted about my identity because I was like, you know, I didn't really fit in India, and I didn't really fit in Alaska. So like, who was I, and like, what was I doing? And what was important to me, like how did I want to like create my life? So so I remember, yeah, like I just remember like going, you know, going to parties, and you know, but also like having, you know, a lot of friends that first year. And I think as my journey through college progressed, I kind of found my place. Like I found that like I just like to, you know, have friends from different groups and, you know, get to know them and hang out with them. And I didn't really practice much Kundalini yoga. Actually, I didn't really practice much yoga coming out of India, and part of that was because I never was really like that much into physical activity like in India. I was more of like a reader and like someone that likes to analyze things and take things apart. But coming into college, you know, I remember I would do like meditations, and I would, like, my friends would always be like, oh, can you teach me some yoga? You know, like I want to learn some like meditation, breathing exercises. So I remember like, you know, coaching my friends through some of that stuff sometimes. And I actually, like, my senior thesis in college was as a philosophy major was on East-West comparative study, and I was looking at the Bhagavad Gita and Stoicism, and I was trying to see like if they were like related, because I think it was a way of me like working through in my head like what my identity was, because I felt like I was kind of like a Western person, but I was also kind of like, you know, an Eastern person from like being in India and all that. And so I was trying to like grapple with that sense of identity, and that was the easiest way for me to do it, was to make it a project as part of college. And my advisor didn't really know how to handle the project, because he wasn't really a Indian philosopher. He was like, or he wasn't really familiar with Indian philosophy that much. So, you know, I ended up just kind of doing it on my own. But yeah, I mean, so when I was doing my project, I started doing, you know, Kundalini Yoga again, and honestly, I felt like better because I was doing it, and I felt like I was, you know, getting some exercise, and I was also starting to work out too. So I started like creating my exercise routine, and then I would invite my friends to do it, and they liked it. So yeah, like, you know, honestly, I felt like pretty healthy at that point in my life. But yeah, and so after college, you know, I basically just ended up doing like one kriya that I really liked for a long time, and I would just do it. But I always felt kind of weird. The thing was with Kundalini Yoga is I always felt kind of weird about the structure of it, because I think like I like the exercise of yoga, like yoga postures, and like you feel like you're moving with your body, but I didn't like the structure of like Kundalini Yoga and how it's put together. Like there's a lot of mantras, and there's a lot of things you're supposed to do, and it's like it's very like rigid. And like for me, I felt like I always wanted to like take the best from the yoga and then just kind of make it my own, right? Like, so I like the breathing. Like the breathing is really great, and it makes me feel good. And I like some of the postures, um, and you know, just the forms of movement that come with that. But yeah, and that's something I still grapple with to this day, because then after the Prim Code book came out, I'm like, well, that really, you know, is a clear sentiment that, you know, this yoga is definitely something that's too rigid, because it's something that, you know, Yogi Bhajan, you know, it's probably not even, you know, first of all, his yoga, like
It's not right, not his. He didn't make anything. He just took
yeah,
lots of things from lots of sources and called it his own.
right, exactly, yeah.
Made up a
And
narrative of where he had come from and the story of how he had learned all this stuff.
yeah, exactly. And so, you know, it kind of left me, you know, feeling really conflicted about, you know, yoga, especially after that. And it's like, yeah, I mean, to this day, like I'm still, you know, trying to figure out that part of things, because I really do feel like, you know, yoga is something that can be beneficial for people, but also, you know, the way that it's presented, like I don't want to get up on stage and tell people Kundalini Yoga is this thing that Yogi Bhajan created, and you know, and it has this kind of certain history, and like I don't know, I'm not a like yoga scholar, but I can definitely say that, like, you know, people weren't over in India chanting the Sunshine Song after after their yoga sets, you know, and just a lot of the mantras. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say too much about that because I'm not really a yoga scholar, but
Well,
yeah.
what I hear you saying is that in college, you were starting to grapple with your identity. On one end, it's kind of like, well, I'm not Indian, and these parts of the culture I'm not so sure about. And then yet I'm getting kind of like looked at as being like holy, and like I know something special, and maybe I have something to teach. And there's a lot that comes with that. Like I know that as I started shedding the external identity, there was something to be said for like, oh, if I wore a turban publicly versus not a turban, the way people respond to me changed. And as popularity of spiritual things over the last decade in the, you know, in the 2000s and 2010s, that was a great thing. We weren't ostracized. It was like, oh, wow, you're a Western person with a turban and you grew up with yoga. Oh, and there was a sense of kind of inflation inside of me taking place, like, oh, maybe where I come from is really good. But then there's also confusing parts of that because it is traced back into hypocrisy and things that were cultural misappropriated and things that I didn't know where to house. At the same time, I was proud, like, but I got a lot of experiences and I had an international perspective. So it's like I feel that sense of you searching for your identity. And on one end, it's like, let me try drinking. No, that didn't feel very good. Let me try yoga. Well, that kind of makes me feel good, but I'm still confused about it. And then when in March 2020 it all breaks open, now it starts to validate some of your own internal confusion.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I just want to say, like, one of the things that I was also working through coming out of college was I ended up, like right after college, I started working for the National Park Service in Alaska. And so I was doing like video production, going out to all these remote communities in Alaska and like, flying on small planes and helicopters and all this stuff, like filming and photographing and meeting people and all this stuff. And, uh, you know, that was the time where I really started like wondering about my turban too, because like, for me, like, and I think everyone, is different. And I definitely respect Sikhism as a tradition. But I also feel like for me, like, wearing a turban was like really kind of annoying for me because I would like, it didn't work. Like, like every time I'd wear a turban, like, when I was playing sports, it would fall off. When I'm hiking, it would fall off. Like, I would have to be like flying in a helicopter and, put on my flight helmet. And like, you can't put on a flight helmet like with a turban on, like it just doesn't work. And, once you're in the backcountry for like 10 days, your turban is not going to work either, like at least from my experience. So that's why I stopped like really wearing a turban because, I just didn't feel like it was working for my way of life. I just felt like, I mean, and I know it works for some people and that's totally cool. But yeah, for me, like, yeah, I just felt like that was one of those things where, just, along with the fact that, I'm not really like, I don't do a lot of Sikh things. So I don't want to,
Identify.
I don't really want to, appropriate that culture without,
Yeah.
doing what a Sikh is supposed to do. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you started grappling with these things way earlier than all the revelations came out. You're kind of checking in with your own identity along the way and figuring out who am I in this larger society? Who do I want to be? What feels good to me?
Yeah.
So fast forward many years because this is probably like 2012, 13, 14, 15, I'm guessing, because
Mm-hmm.
that's college years for you, and then going right into the work world. And then bring us through that time into like when you found out about Premka's book. Was this stuff new for you? Had you already kind of unpacked some of that stuff?
Yeah. So like, I mean, so I knew that there was things going on in the world of 3HO because I was always skeptical about Hari Jivan and Rama. Like I would always see them at solstice and I was like, these guys just seem like they're really like sappy with their words um, and it was just really like gross. It made my skin kind of crawl.
They would be at
um,
solstice,
yeah, yeah,
pouring
yeah,
you
at
on and
solstice.
Guru Jagat and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just the way that people talked about the way that people talked about them too. Like, I just remember coming to winter solstice one year and, you know, this one guy is like, oh, like how do you Jivan is in now? Like he's the guy to follow. And it was like that's kind of just that's like the kind of thing you hear when you're walking into like a cult, a cult worship group or something. So so anyways, but can you say the question again? Sorry.
Um, we were talking about
Oh yeah. Leading up to now, like on the Primco group.
yeah,
But
how you found out
so
about that.
yeah, so I was definitely unaware that about the Yogi Bhajan part of things. I did not know about that. I didn't know about Primka, um, and part of that is just because I was in Alaska doing my own thing, and I didn't really interface that much with people from 3HO, So, but I did know about there was some fishy stuff that happened like throughout. even my time in India, like I remember one time a friend of mine found a hard drive, and he was looking through it for like yoga manuals or something, and he came across like a picture of like a Skype conversation, and it was a screenshot of what's his name, the guy that does Satnam Rasayan.
Guru Dev Singh.
Yeah, Guru Dev Singh. It was a screenshot of Guru Dev Singh like topless, with like a woman that was also topless in like the lower screen. And so I remember like he told me about that, and I was like, we were like, man, like that's kind of weird, and I think that was one of the first things that really got me kind of skeptical about things, the way that things were happening in 3HO. But that was early on, and I kind of, it kind of set the tone for it. But yeah, then later on, like I said, I would go to solstice events. I went to a solstice event like my second to last year of college, and then later on with my parents, even after college. And yeah, I never really knew about the Yogi Bhajan thing or anything like that. But yeah, then the Primka book came out. Was it last year or the year before? It was like last.
Yep, January 2020.
Right, because it was like it was coupled with the pandemic. Yeah.
When all of it came out, pandemic came out.
Yeah. So so then the book came out, and I remember actually right before that, I was visiting with a friend who is a lawyer for 3HO in Anchorage, Amritsar, and she mentioned that at a Khalsa council meeting there was a bunch of stuff that happened, and I was like, I wonder what kind of stuff that was, So I had like a little, sneak peek that there was something going on. But yeah, then the Primka book came out, and I didn't actually read the book yet, the whole thing, but my fiance did, and she told me about it. And then I read an Olive Branch report, and yeah, I mean, it honestly didn't really surprise me that much, because I think I was at the point at that point, I had thought about it enough. I had given it enough thought that, along with my experiences in India being bullied and like seeing how, Jagat Guru and these guys behaved, like, I really honestly was not surprised. I was kind of like, well, yeah, like, this kind of fits with the narrative. And, it also like, the Bikram documentary hadn't come out not so long ago either. I remember watching that even like last year, I think, or no, 2 years ago, I watched that. And yeah, so like, it's just, one of those things that came out that, yeah, like kind of solidified how I feel about things. And then in the beginning of this whole situation, I joined the Primka group on Facebook, and I joined
the Cage Facebook group.
Right. And I joined the Yogi Bhajan Legacy group too, because I wanted to see the different perspectives and how people were dialoguing. And man, like the Yogi Bhajan Legacy group was a trip. Like I got kicked out of that group for asking. I basically just pushed back against someone's thought very gently. Like I'm not like a super aggressive person, but I just like questioned what they said. And like, I just asked a question, like, using the Socratic method, which is like how you get, people to think for themselves. And they just went like crazy. They went crazy. Like they just blew up, and the admin Harpal, like, suspended me from posting. And then he called me up on my phone. He wanted to talk by phone. So I talked to him, and like, he seemed like not that, like there wasn't like a lot of like missteps in his communication. So he seemed like a somewhat normal person on the phone. But then after the phone conversation, then he like called me all these names on instant messenger, and like he was writing in like all caps, and like, I mean, the guy is psychotic. Like he has problems. So anyways, like I took a lot of action about that, and I think I posted on the Primka group about it, and the second gen group. And I also told, the 3HO lawyer that I know about it, because, that was, but that also kind of solidified even more the way I feel about the mentality is like, like if you're in that much of denial that something is not right, then it's like it's kind of a red flag that there's some things that people have to work through in this community. And I really I really want to acknowledge like everyone that's actually taken time to read the Olive Branch report and hear the stories from survivors. And it's just, to me, it's kind of like why would someone take the time to write a story or tell their story with a lot of emotion on a call in front of a bunch of other people while lying about it? Like there's too much evidence that these things happened to deny it. I mean, it's not healthy for people to to be denying these things. But yeah, I mean, anyways, I mean, yeah, I guess that's kind of how I feel now, is like I feel like we're, as a community, obviously everything is kind of in limbo. And for me personally, like I'm just gonna, I'm gonna do what makes my body feel healthy, but I'm not gonna, do Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan. And I'm gonna forge my own way, just like I've been doing my whole life. So
Yeah, beautiful. I want to commend you for drawing your line in the sand. This Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan stuff, copyright. And I also want listeners to know that what Dave Dudham is speaking of in terms of these different groups is when all of this came out in 2020, it was called White Bird in a Golden Cage, Premka's book. And so a Facebook group was created to support a place for conversation and expression around what that book was about and people's response to it. And it quickly grew to like 5,000 members. And when it hit a peak of processing, a lot of people started sharing their stories, abuse stories. It was our own little Me Too movement. That group has morphed into a group called Beyond the Cage, right? So it's moving forward in our processing. And there's other groups that are moving forward in the conversation about Kundalini Yoga, and other groups moving forward in the conversation of 3HO. This group is specifically to support survivors and a conversation around that. And so anyways, just to give some perspective. I think you just brought up a lot of stuff in there, Dave Dudham, in people's responses, reactions, even the choice to read the book or not. I found a lot of first generation people just jump right to I support survivors, but didn't want to touch that book. And I found that so fascinating because I think it goes back to a really old narrative about Premka that got indoctrinated in our parents' generation in the 80s.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I'm still, working with my parents on their, ways of doing things, because, as long as I've been around, like my mom is always, she's always really hard on herself, and she wants to do things the right way. And so even to this day, she's still saying, I gotta wake up for sadhana tomorrow at 6 a.m., 4 a.m. in the morning. It's like, no, you don't. You can just like do something for yourself in the morning that makes you feel good, but it doesn't have to be, like Aquarian sadhana. And it can be whatever you want it to be. Like sadhana just means a spiritual practice. So you can make anything spiritual. You can be running in it. It can be spiritual if you're listening to the birds chirping around you, if you're listening to the wind whistling through the trees. You can go on a morning swim, or you can go on an evening swim. It can be your, like that. I think that's the important thing, is just taking time to connect with the world around you and to be connected. That's what it's all about. So.
Are your parents paying attention? Have they read the AOB report? Are they listening?
Yeah. So my dad took the time to actually read the report, and he's been really diligent with looking through all the materials, and he's definitely in agreement that that Yogi Bhajan, committed a lot of atrocities. And I think that, he's at the point now where he's kind of like, yeah, I think that he's working through kind of like probably an identity crisis with it, because, it's like everything that he's practiced and learned over these years, is kind of coming crashing down. So I think he's trying to find ways to work with that. And like, he's like, well, if Yogi Bhajan can just make up a Kriya, so can I. So, he's learning how to, experiment and like make it his own, which is, I think, really awesome. And I'm glad he's in that position. My mom is having more of a difficulty, I think, because she felt like she was taken in by the community when she joined. And for her, it's always been really important to be like connected with the community. And in order for her to feel connected, like she has to do things right. And so, yeah, it's kind of like her touchstone. So like, like I try to be like really gentle with her, because, she's kind of like a, what's the word? She's a kind of fragile soul. So I like my parents are older. They're like 70 years old. So
Your parents are.
Yeah.
And are they both still teaching Kundalini Yoga?
No, I mean, they um, they they do yoga workshops sometimes, but they don't teach like regular classes. So I've been trying to just like work with my mom. Like when I hear her bring things up, I just try and I just try and get her to think for herself more, instead of like what the group think. But like I said,
think for yourself versus the group thinking.
Yeah. And so, I try and get her to do like empowering things like working out and stuff like that, because, she's a really airy person. So like, it's helpful for her to have like grounding practices, like, working out and with her feet on the ground. So that's what I try and do with my parents. I don't, I don't go too hard on them, because, I don't think it's worth it for me and for my situation with my parents. But I know that some people have different relationship with their parents, which is totally cool. If your parents are more, willing to take bigger steps. But yeah, I just try and do it bit by bit.
The AOB report, for those of you that don't know, is an olive branch report in which stories of direct abuse from Yogi Bhajan to women were shared and accumulated in a report done by the Olive Branch. And so that's what we're referring to as we speak to that. If you haven't read it, we encourage you to, because it really did illuminate a pattern of abuse, and that these women didn't necessarily talk to each other. They all reported harm directly, and the fact that their stories really kind of told the same story in, anywhere from 6 to 30 different bodies. Really, if anyone who reads it will start to have an identity crisis from our community. If you're not reading it, it's a lot easier to stay in the party line group think, because it's not people from your own community sharing a very sadistic experience of mutilation and long ongoing psychological and sexual and physical abuse. I want to commend you for coming on today and for sharing.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Gunishan, for hosting these podcasts.
I think that you've shared a lot of really important perspectives in terms of the confusingness of it all. One can know one holds trauma, like yourself, and yet still be reconciling, but there was good in it. And then somebody else can actually not even know they had trauma. They put everything into a context of a beautiful white box with a beautiful white bow, and now that's being shattered open, and that's a different level of unraveling. And it sounds like you've unraveled in stages, because you've been questioning your own identity for some time, and this kind of like nail in the coffin, like, yeah, this makes sense when all this went down. And it doesn't mean that your identity isn't any less confusing to deal with. It's just more in plain sight than it's ever been.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah.
What was it like for you to witness your brothers and sisters that you went to school with speak out for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, it was really eye-opening actually, because I didn't honestly really realize like how much difficulties other people were having at that school. I felt like, like I knew I had a bad experience, from the time I went there to the time I left. I knew that a few of my close friends had some bad experiences, but just to hear the emotion, the raw emotion, and you know the feeling that people had about the way that they felt in those moments, it really brought it home for me. Like, and I felt like I just had a lot of compassion. I just felt a lot of compassion for my classmates and the older kids too. The kids that bullied me. I think that we're all in it together, and it's really kind of a beautiful thing that we all came together to have those conversations and just facilitate space for each other to listen and to share. And I hope that we can keep doing that. I hope we can keep doing that, and be vulnerable and share with each other, because that's what brings authenticity and to our community. Um, and I hope for our community as a whole that, like, something good comes out of it, that we stay connected in a way that brings goodness to the world in some other, by revealing truths and falsehoods, um, and just um, you know yeah, just helping others. So
Yeah, by having our story told, we're helping someone in the future that may be exposed to Kundalini Yoga or 3HO or whatever, and want to be critically thinking, want to getting a bigger perspective. And our stories at this juncture of their experience might make all the difference, from them not just getting the good marketing of our organizations or our schools or our companies, but also get the full range of perspective, get all the reviews, not just the light wash painted ones of amazing knowledge, so to speak.
yeah, exactly, right. So yeah, as we continue to tell these stories, hopefully that's what comes of it.
Yeah, I know when I was listening to some of the listening stories, I was astounded. I was astounded by the levels of emotional repression that had taken place, and
Yeah,
the culture of silence, that people could be roommates for years and not know each other's abuse story.
yeah,
That some kids had been molested by staff, other kids had been molested by each other. Um, Physical beatings, obviously the major physical brutality, and that it didn't start with MPA. It was a culture that had breeded long before that, and it morphed into that when that became kind of like our grounds, our school. But prior to that, the school that started in the 80s and the 90s, like all these abuses, the abuse of black kids that were in our community in the early years of India and in the 80s, and just all sorts of other level of abuse. If you go for 30, 40 years as a community not talking about it, and those kids just kind of disappear out of our community and move on, then the next generation learns, oh yeah, it's not safe to talk about it. Yep, it's not safe
yeah,
to talk about it. Our parents don't want to hear about it. Our teachers don't want to hear about it. We definitely aren't safe to talk to each other. And this actually creates a physiological response in us over time. And so it's why uncomfortable conversations are uncomfortable, because they're actually good conversations, but they're uncomfortable because our own nervous system isn't comfortable speaking about things that could ripple somebody else's life, confuse somebody else's identity. We don't want to mess somebody else's world up by sharing our story, and that's also a part of the predatory history.
yeah,
Stay silent at all costs. because if you speak out, it'll mess somebody else's life up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm really glad that this culture is becoming more prevalent of like just allowing people to speak up and share. Um, hopefully this encourages more people to be open, and maybe some people that are not open right now will, start to open themselves up when they start to see like more and more people opening up themselves. Because I know a lot of these people that are denying the allegations, they're people that have their own traumas that they just don't want to see. Like
That's right.
I mean, the lady that cussed me out on the Yogi Bhajan Legacy group, like, she's this lady from Germany, and she's like I think she has serious problems, that she probably doesn't want to face herself, and so, I mean, yeah, I really do hope that, this is, this healing space that we've created is something that will expand and be more prevalent as time goes on. And I think even beyond the 3HO community, there's a lot of yoga communities out there that are dealing with this kind of stuff right now, because we're coming out of this era of it's like the guru era. Like there was this era of the gurus that came out of the 60s and 70s. Like my parents were hippies, like they were at least they were in that era, and they saw there was this Eastern knowledge that they could find and follow and learn from and become better people. But there was also a dark side to that. And, now once everyone's lived through those experiences of the gurus, people are, having to confront the nasty side of that, those times. And yeah, I mean, hopefully we're entering, an era where people are more honest and authentic with each other. And that means also, just, being vulnerable and being open to, facilitating that space for others to be vulnerable in a loving way. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I say that a lot too. The age of the guru is dead. And yet, it's also very much alive for those that are still seeking it, meaning what you're talking about with the Rama group is a prime example of that. It's, people are wanting something to believe or belong to something outside of themselves, and it's a very easy thing to get wrapped up in philosophies that say they're the answer to everything. And when we're not coming from critical thinking backgrounds and we come from trauma backgrounds, it validates that deep sense of longing that we desire and we have inside.
Yeah.
You're just speaking such good truths today. Thank you so much for giving us a lens into the nurturing that community brings, and also the disconnection it brings when we're not actually having a sense of self within it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you so much. And
before we wrap up and move to your song, is there anything that you would like to say share in the final parts of your story?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much I could say. I mean, I could go on for hours, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I hope that we're entering a space that's better than before. Like I hope that we're heading into a better place than we were by opening ourselves to these stories and sharing these stories and I mean, I saw a lot of these, like you said, just the culture of silence and kind of shunning that happened when people went off and wanted to do life their own way. And I think it's really important to, let people live their own lives and obviously be there as a support along the way. But, you should always let people make their own decisions and just celebrate them along the way. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for that. Tell us about your song. Why did you choose this song?
Well, I was looking for a song, and I have this playlist on Spotify of like all these old, 60s and 70s songs, and it's called Classics. And I was looking through the lyrics on them, and some of them are just this one just seemed right because it's kind of even more than just my story. It's a story, I think, of where our community is right now as a whole. And if you listen to the lyrics, it's obviously it's about the Vietnam War and the protests that were happening back in the 60s and 70s. But I think it also applies to where we are right now. And hopefully, this is an opportunity for us to reconcile and for people to just acknowledge, listen and be heard, right? What is it they say in those, when you take those trainings on facilitation, they say like, listen, speak to be heard and listen to be, I don't remember, but, the important thing is to, listen to others and just really, truly listen, and listen with all your heart. And then when you're speaking, speak with your heart too. So, that's hopefully the place that we can get to by continuing to have these conversations.
Yeah, beautiful. Well said. All right, folks, let's listen to Dave Dedham's song here. This is Buffalo Springfield, For What It's Worth. Well, thank you for that. We don't play the whole song because of copyright, but if you'd like to listen to the song in full, you can follow the Uncomfortable Conversations Spotify playlist, which I add the link in the description. You can also donate to the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast at gurunishan.com/uncomfortable conversations. I want to thank Dave Dedham for being here for another episode of the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the Kundalini Yoga 3HO community. If you'd like to contribute to this podcast, once again, you can contribute at gurunishan.com/uncomfortable conversations. And if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast in the future, please send me an email at gn@gurunishan.com. Guru Nishan does have a C in it, so it's NISCHAN.com. Thank you so much for being here, Dave Dedham. Thank you so much to our listeners. Please like, share, subscribe, and review this podcast on all platforms. And we'll see you again on the next episode. Thank you.